sit down.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Master the NEC, where we talk about the National Electrical Code and all things electrically related. My name is Paul Abernathy, your host as always. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to watch this video and for sharing this video with others so that we all can learn the National Electrical Code together. Tonight's show is sponsored by electricianpride.com. That's electricianpride.com. That's where you can go get your mugs, your stickers, your phone cases, your t-shirts, all that with all different types of logos on it for electricians, master, journeyman, engineers, inspectors, a little bit of everything there. So check it out at electricianpride.com. Also, one of our sponsors is the Sparky Hub. If you want to interact with other electricians and you're tired of all this social media restrictions and everybody causing problems, and you want to go to the Sparky Hub, because the Sparky Hub is a social media platform that allows you to actually post electrical things, get feedback from other electricians. I frequent it and I give a lot of advice there as well. So if you're an electrical professional, electrician, a journeyman, apprentice, master, doesn't matter, check out thesparkyhub.com. That's at www.thesparkyhub.com. All right, so tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about existing dwellings. Oh, I should mention, stay tuned to the end of this video because I'm going to talk to you about how you can get stickers for free. These are our latest stickers that we just received, okay? These are freebies, so you want to stick around to the end, so I'll give you instructions on how you can get these for free sent to you, okay? Look great on hard hats, great on toolboxes, great on trucks, great on everything, okay? All right, so we're going to talk existing dwellings today. And a lot of people say, Paul, what do you do when you have 100 amp service on an older home and you want to know whether or not they're adding a small addition or doing something that actually is going to add more square footage, and maybe even they're adding additional circuit loads like extending a kitchen or something, and you might have additional small appliances, or they're expanding a laundry room, or they're doing something that's going to enhance the footprint of the structure, but you need to know whether or not the existing service or even a feeder can handle these new loads. And so we're going to kind of talk about it today in this episode and kind of give you some insight, look at the code, and kind of explain some things. Again, your install is going to be a little different, your sizes are going to be different, but the same concept that I talk about in today's show is going to apply broadly, okay, through all of those applications. So let's go on and jump into it, and let's look at the code. So what we're talking about is 220.83, existing dwelling units. So as it says here, as you can see on the screen, and of course I'll follow along so you can follow with me, we want to know whether or not if we add an addition, can the existing service, really is what we're trying to do, that or the feeder, can handle this new load, okay? So that's what we want to focus on, whether it's the service equipment or whether or not it's feeding a feeder downstream that the new loads are going to be going into. Is that feeder going to handle these new loads? And collectively, do I have the proper size setup for this existing dwelling in order to be able to accommodate these? And that's what we're going to look at today, all right? And there's even an error in here that's in the code book that we're going to hopefully clear up a little bit for you today. All right, so let's look at the code. So here's where we're at right here. So we're talking about 220.83 right here. This is what we're talking about today. Now let's read the code and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about it. It says, this section shall be permitted to be used to determine if the existing service or feeder is of sufficient capacity to serve the additional loads. Okay, so we might have 1,000 square foot small home that's getting another 500 square foot added to it, which now is actually a 1,500 square foot home, okay? So it says where dwelling unit is served by a 120 240 volt or a 208 Y120 3-wire service, okay? So it's got to be a 3-wire service, so that's only applies here is to 3-wire services of the 122/40 volt or 208Y120. It says it shall be permissible to calculate the total load in accordance with 220.83A or B. Okay, so couple things first to set straight so that we're all kind of on the same page here. The first one we're going to look at is 220.83A, and that is if you're adding additional space to a dwelling, and you're not going to be adding any additional AC or any space heating. Okay, so what's in the building is already sufficient. Okay, you're just adding a little bit more to the footprint. All right, and again, we're under the 2020 edition of the National Electrical Code, in case you wondered. So in that case, I do have to account for this additional space. Now, a lot of times I get questions about, what about an unfinished basement that was unfinished? Typically, an unfinished basement in new construction, it's still going to be adaptable for future use. So your 3 VA per square foot that y'all are probably all familiar with in 220.14J, that should already account for the general use receptacles and general lighting. That should already be figured in. Even though it's empty right now, it's still something that can be adapted for future use, so it should be in your 3 VA per square foot calculation, okay? But in older homes, sometimes that probably wasn't the case, especially if it's of decent size, but it's an unfinished space, or they're adding an addition, but in that unfinished space, there's a good chance that they did not take that entire dwelling's footprint at 3 VA per square foot, because it might be just a simple 100 amp service, and maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But when you're doing an existing dwelling, you're going to have to go off of what's the face value. It's a 100 amp service, let's say. Now, as far as it being an existing dwelling, I am going to have to redo a calculation as if this was a totally new dwelling. Okay. Now, what's interesting here is I don't have to take the AC and the heat in the first method, because we already know the service is 100 amps. All we're trying to do is say, okay, obviously 100 amps was adequate for what they have now, okay? But what I'm trying to determine is, well, what if I take what they've got now, and now I redo the calculation, minus the AC and heat, and now do I have enough to handle the existing service, okay? So that's the kind of concept, because it's already adequate to handle the heat and AC already. So, okay, so it's kind of a weird concept, but you'll look at it because we're going to follow exactly what it says, okay? So don't get confused. Then the other concept is B, whereas, and we're talking about 220.83B, it says, well, I'm going to add some air conditioning unit. Maybe it's an air conditioning unit and central AC, and maybe it adds an additional cumulatively with everything, the blowers and air handler and everything, is 7,200 VA. Well, then you're going to add that because that's part of B, and we have directions for that. But you'll notice nothing in A is going to talk about heating or air conditioning of the existing loads, okay? So I just wanted to clear that up, because as we look at it, I don't want you to say, well, wait a minute, if I got to redo the whole dwelling calculation again, don't I have to add the AC and the heat? Not under this, because it's already existing. All you're trying to do is capture the loads itself and see if the existing service is okay. It's obviously okay right now for whatever heat and AC is being utilized in it. You with me? I know that sounds contradictory to what we would do if we did a new calculation, but that's what it says. All right, so rather than to continually confuse you, let's go look at the code. All right, so here's what we've got, and I will follow along with it. So here's where we're at right here. First one, 220.83A, it says, where additional air conditioning equipment or electric space heating is not to be installed. Okay, so we're not adding any additional heat, we're not adding any additional AC, and all we're trying to do is determine whether that existing service, let's say, we'll keep it simple, service, can handle the new loads. Now, we still have to go back and do a calculation, okay, because we need to know what everything is. And so that's why it's said right here at the beginning, it says this section shall be permitted to be used to determine the existing service load is a sufficient size. All right? It says right here, the following percentages shall be used for existing and additional new loads. But you'll notice nothing in here talks about AC or heat. Okay? So don't let that bog you down. And don't try to get your mind into, well, why? This is an existing dwelling application. In a new calculation, you would. Okay, this is existing, and all we're trying to do is come up with the values and compare it and see if it now is adequate to be used with this service. Just watch it as we go through this. Now, here's the percentages you're going to use. Now, as you can see here, the first 8,000 VA at 100% and the remainder at 40%. Now, this looks very familiar, right? This would be just like what you'd see in the optional method for the general loads here under 220.82b. If you were doing a dwelling unit using the optional method under Part 4. The only difference here is that in this one, you take the first 10,000 VA at 100% and then the remainder at 40 when it comes to the general loads. Okay, so down here, we're actually going to take the first 8,000 at 100%, and then we're going to take the remainder at 40%. So what do we have to do? Okay, so we said this theoretical dwelling was 1,000 square feet, and we're going to add an additional 500 feet to it. Okay, and so also in this addition, we're going to add a new range. It has an existing range, and we're going to add a new range. Okay, the existing range might be like an 8,000 VA, and we're going to add a 12,000 VA. So it's a little larger. But now, remember, we're going to use nameplates here. So we're going to do directly what's on the nameplate. So this is why it makes it a little easier for you to work with the existing loads and the loads you're going to be installing. Why? Because you're just going to go around and you're going to gather all of the appliances. You're going to get the info for the range, unless they're going to a bigger range, then you're going to let the bigger one replace whatever was there in this new calc. A dryer, you're going to get that information if a dryer exists. You're going to bring all that, again, nameplate. All of that's going to be done just like you were doing a normal optional calculation where you're going to use nameplate. Okay, so let's kind of walk through it. So number one, it says, okay, you got your paper, you're trying to do your load calc. Remember, the existing service was 100 amps. All you're doing now is going to recalculate this dwelling minus the heat and AC, follow the optional, kind of an optional path here, and then you're going to apply all the rules. So first things first. Number one, general lighting and general receptacle uses at 3 VA per square foot as determined by 220.12. Well, this is actually a misprint. This is supposed to be 220. Well, in this case, since we're dealing with dwellings, then this would be under 220.14J. Okay. Now, if you're doing the square footage values, how to determine all that, then it would be 220.11. Okay, and because that is new for the 2020 edition of the National Electrical Code. Either way, we're trying to establish 3 VA per square foot. So in our case, we now have a new size dwelling, remember, and that was 1,500 square feet. And again, remember, we're going to take 1,500 times 3 is 4,500. Okay, so that's our value for that application. All right, so that's our general, and we're taking a full value there. The next is 1,500 VA for each 2-wire 20 amp small appliance branch circuit and each laundry branch circuit covered in 210.11C1 and C2. So if I have any small appliance branch circuits, and we're supposed to have them at least 2, but if we're adding an addition, and let's say we add a third one and a fourth one, then those also are going to be, again, additional 1,500 VA. So you're basically going to do the calculation as if it was new, but you're going to take what the existing circuits were. So you're going to have to go to the panel. You're going to have to do a little research and find out what's going on to see what's existing. And then any new ones that you add, you got to make sure that you account for their VA. And again, small appliances, 1,500 VA each. Laundry circuits, if there's an additional laundry circuit, it's 1,500. If there's one that's already existing, it's 1,500. Okay, so you're doing it like it was a new calc. The only thing you're doing here is you're leaving off what? You're leaving off the AC and the heat in this process. Okay. Then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to go around and you're going to try to do a little list of all the appliances. So all the appliances that are fastened in place, that are permanently connected or located to be on a specific circuit for something very specific. Okay. Example of that would be a garbage disposal, for example. All right. So you're going to look for all of those and write those appliances down. Okay. Nameplate. All right. Next, you're going to take the range, any counter-mounted cooking, any of the cooking appliances that are range, wall-mounted ovens, or counter-mounted cooking, as stated here in B, you're going to get the nameplates for those, okay? You're going to get those nameplates, write it down. Next, if there's a clothes dryer present, then you're going to take that clothes dryer again at the nameplate, because that's what it says here, taking the nameplate values. And again, it's that are not connected to the laundry circuit in item 2. Okay? And typically, the dryer would not be. Okay? Now, if it's one of those applications in a dwelling unit that's one of those dryers that's plugged into the laundry circuit because of a small laundry setup, then that would be plugged into the laundry circuit. There would be no addition. Okay? But typically, your dryer is going to have its own connection to its own branch circuit. So you want to take that into consideration. If the dryer's there, and it's not part of the existing laundry circuit, which it probably will not be, it'll probably be a 30 amp circuit for most cases in most dwelling units, then you're going to take the nameplate for that dryer, okay? And you're writing it down, just keeping your list. And then, of course, the water heater, all right? So once you take the water heater, it's a 4,500 watt water heater, there you go. Take the watts, convert it to VA, which again, if it's 4.5 kW, that's equivalent to 4,500 VA. We always want to work things to VA if we possibly can. So very simple. You take that cumulative value, you do the first 8,000 at 100%. So you set 8,000 aside, and then whatever the remainder above 8,000, you're going to do that at 40%. When you get that value, you're going to add the 8,000 back to it, and that's your load. Now you're going to take that load and you're going to divide it by 240 because that's what your service is, 240. And if that ampacity value is less than the 100 amp service that is already existing, you're good to go. That means that service can handle the additional load that you added to it. And since it already had AC and heat on it, it's already considered to serve those as well because you didn't add any additional, and it was already there for that. See what I'm saying? All right, so now, that one's pretty straightforward, and that's how you would do it. So I usually tell my students, take everything except for the AC and heat and just treat it like you're doing a brand new calculation, kind of like the optional method, except you're following all the rules in 220.83a. Pretty simple. Now, let's say you're doing that same little addition, and the homeowner comes to you and says, okay, I want to put central air in it. And you go to the values, you add up all the values, your blower, your heater, everything that's involved in your central air, and it adds an additional 7,200 VA. Okay, well, the interesting thing about this calculation is when you're going down here under 220.83b, right here, everything is the same as what you just did. The only difference is you need to take that additional load for that air conditioning or that central electric heating, space heating, or if you have less than 4 separate controlled space heating units, take it at 100%. So look, it's very similar to what you just did, except all you're going to do is 100% take that AC and heat and add it to whatever your value is you just calculated, because everything else is still the same. Okay, you do the general lighting the same, 3 VA per square foot, small appliance branch circuits at 1,500 VA each, even the existing ones and the new ones, if there's any new ones added. Any specific loads that are added, you're going to take those into consideration as well. The nameplate, okay, rating of the following, which is all appliance fastened in place, and again, or anything that's located on a specific circuit, so that would be any type of dedicated equipment or any dedicated appliance. You're going to add that in. So everything stays the same. The only difference here is they've told you that they're going to be adding AC or heat. And if that's the case, as it says right here, whatever the value is, in our case, to say it was air conditioning unit, it was done at, the new is adding new air conditioning, and that came to a value of 7,200 VA, then all I'm going to do is add that 7,200 VA onto what I calculated up here under A, because A is no different than B. It just doesn't have the heat or AC involved in it, okay, for the new AC or the new heat, okay? So pretty simple. Take all these values, work it out the same way we just did before, and then when you get to the end, whatever your AC is, whatever your heat is, take that full value at 100% and add it to your normal calculation, okay? Pretty simple, right? Okay. All right, and the reason that these are delineated, and I'll show you this because I get this question from people a lot. Notice these three right here, and then of course, then it's your rules are down here. Okay, so you're not applying the first 8 kVA and 100% to these loads. Only this portion here is what you apply to this portion here. Once you get this value, then take 100% of whatever the AC load was, or 100% of whatever the central space heating was, whichever is larger, and you add that to whatever your equation was that you did down here, just like we did before. So you add them two together. Now, isn't that very similar to what we do right here in the optional method? Remember, we got our general loads right here that follow the same course of action, right? And then, of course, you have this down here for the heating and air conditioning loads. And you choose whichever is the largest, 100 of the AC or 100 of the heat, or whatever you do, you're simply going to take this and add it with whatever your total was from here. Well, that's the same thing you're doing down here. Just remember, if you're adding an addition and it's got no heat or AC being added to the existing application, then you just follow the rules right here and do it just like we did. If you're adding heat to it, follow all the rules like we just did, but then also take the heat or AC, whichever's larger, at 100%, add them together, and then take that value and divide it by 240. Now, because you've added AC or heat, additional AC or heat, now that 100 amp service might not be sufficient. And that would mean you'd have to bump it up in size or do a service change or service upgrade or whatnot like that, because the existing one is not acceptable to that. Now, if you did all this and it was still less than the 100 amp service, then it's adequate. Don't have to do anything else. Okay, so that's how this works. The main focus I want to really hammer home with you is that when you do this calculation, you're really going to treat it just like you're doing a new load calculation. You still got to go around and gather your data. You still have to pull it all together. The only difference is if you're not adding any new AC or heat, then I don't have to consider it when I'm doing 220.83a. The only time I have to consider AC or heat is if I'm doing B. In that new addition or new space that I'm adding, I'm also adding some heating or air conditioning component, whichever's larger. Then I'm going to add that to my calculation and then add whatever the first 8,000 at 100% and the remainder at 40%. I'm going to take that based on the list, and then I'm going to take my AC or heat, whichever's larger, at 100%, add the two together, divide that by 240, and now see if my service is adequate. Okay, so A and B, little different. One includes new heat and AC and one does not. But that is the concept, pretty simple, straightforward. That's how you do an existing dwelling unit in order to determine whether or not the existing service or feeder is adequate to handle all these additional new loads. Okay, hopefully you got something out of that. Again, we'll have other episodes on other ways to do a calculation on existing applications. There's another method that we can follow later. And so we'll look at all those in a future episode. Till next time, stay safe, folks, and God bless.
Shut up and sit down.